Well, our reporter Charlie Peters is on the ground in Tel Aviv and joins us now live. A very good morning to Charlie. What's the latest?
Yes, well, last night the IDF said that they would be striking the Gaza Strip in that coordinated and complex attack from the air, land and sea. But those comments came as the UN said that the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is untenable. We still don't have clear details on the latest from Gaza on how many civilians have fled south after that warning 48 hours ago now that they needed to get out of the north of Gaza and head south of the Wadi Gaza. Last night's briefing with the IDF's chief spokesperson, he said that hundreds of thousands had fled, but wouldn't give a precise number, and any opportunity to learn further about that situation was interrupted as rocket fire came in on Tel Aviv, and the press briefing was interrupted as we all took shelter. Last night's rocket attack was the first successful rocket attack on Tel Aviv in central Israel since the war started, with at least one large missile landing about a few miles south of our location in the southern suburbs of the city. But the Iron Dome air defence system does continue to intercept the vast majority of missiles sent in from Gaza. But also last night there were more troubling developments in the north. We saw Lebanese Hezbollah release footage of them launching anti-tank guided missiles on Israeli positions in the north of Israel. And we saw the resumption of artillery fire coming in from Syria. And this comes as last night we saw footage of the Iranian foreign minister meeting with Hamas chief political leader as tensions grow and people fear that Iran may start to engage in these hostilities as the IDF push into the Gaza Strip. Could this localised conflict become more regional and therefore more devastating?
Which is a huge international concern, Charlie. Obviously, I mean, when countries like Iran are getting more involved, when Syria is, as you say, attacking as well, or missiles being fired from Syrian territory, which of course is Russian-backed. This just escalates it out of control. Absolutely, and in the north of Israel, they are facing an area known to analysts as the Shia Crescent, that stretch of land from Iran through Iraq all the way from Syria into Lebanon, where the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the asymmetric special forces unit of the Iranian military, is able to operate with great freedom. It can sustain its forces out there. It can prepare the ground to launch attacks. And I think we've already seen some of those attacks in the last 7 days. And the great fear now is that as the IDF launches that comprehensive and large-scale force into the Gaza Strip, that first ground invasion of the territory since 2014, will they also have to suddenly fight a sustained and surging enemy on the north? We know that they've sent hundreds of thousands of reservists to the north, and tank convoys have also head up there while also preparing in the south. But can they fight two great oppositions at the same time? Many fear that Lebanese Hezbollah actually have greater capabilities than Hamas, who are already causing so much trouble for the IDF day and night. Can they fight on both fronts? Well, last night, the IDF chief spokesperson conceded that there had been some struggles with logistics, but that they are gearing up, and they had to, gear up over 500,000 soldiers. And this was an obvious strain and was always going to be a struggle, but they are moving in the right direction.
And of course, the evacuation order has been and gone. The deadline has been and gone yesterday. And yet we know there are still civilians in Gaza still trying to flee. Is there any sense from the IDF that they're going to hold off for a bit longer?
Well, it's clear that the Israeli move is attempting to be limited by those nations in the region, particularly Qatar, the US and Egypt, as they try and, through diplomacy, find a greater humanitarian solution for the people of Gaza. But so far, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, none of his humanitarian shopping list demands are being achieved. There are no humanitarian safe zones in the south of Gaza. Yesterday, there were reports that the crossing into Egypt, the Rafah crossing, would be opened for 4 hours so that people could exit, particularly foreigners caught up in the conflict. But no reports of that crossing opening were received up here. It doesn't seem to have happened. And so the question of proportionality, can the Israeli Defence Force launch that imminent ground invasion while so many civilians, millions of them, flee or are internally displaced in their own territory.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the ongoing issue here, isn't it? Because as much as the international community, in general terms, supports Israel's right to self-defence, Israel's right, actually, to strike back against terrorists, the more there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza as a result, even if you argue that that is the fault of Hamas, nevertheless, the tide begins to turn somewhat, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think we have already started to seeing that shift in world opinion. Last week, obviously, after the atrocities from southern Israel, of those reports of what was happening in the kibbutz and those small communities was travelled around the world, people started to consider Hamas in that ISIS-style butchery, as Benjamin Netanyahu put it. But since then, more and more global leaders have publicly urged restraint on the part of the Israelis. Last night, Germany making a significant intervention there, urging the Israeli side to reconsider before they launch even greater munitions into the Strip. But of course, the Israelis consider the Gaza Strip as a place of two layers. On the top is that civilian layer, where millions of people live in one of the most densely populated areas in the world. And that second layer is subterranean, those underground tunnels and shelters, hundreds of kilometres of them, where Hamas militants can gather their supplies and prepare to launch attacks. If Israel wants to achieve its stated mission, which is to destroy the Hamas military capabilities, then it will need to get to that second layer. So long as civilians are on the top and are living in their homes, in residential areas, it can't reach them. It can't use those more severe munitions.
And the more we read and learn about the everyday life of people living in Israel, near Gaza, or indeed Palestinians living inside Gaza, you start to realise that they have been living with decades of potential conflict. So many of them write about having safe rooms in their houses, having bomb-proof shelters actually in their own houses. Are you aware of any of that? Probably not in Tel Aviv, exactly where you are.
No, every building here has a bomb shelter. Every house has a shelter, because rockets do come in here regularly. I mean, as I said last night, one landed a few miles south of us, and we heard dozens of interceptions by the Iron Dome defence system. People here are forced to run within 90 seconds' notice quite regularly away from rocket attacks. Yesterday we had 3 air raid sirens, and so shelters across the country are commonplace, but they don't anticipate to use them as much as they have done in the last week. And indeed, many people here are discussing this as the worst violence they've seen in 50 years. And fears are now growing after last night's successful rocket attack on Tel Aviv that this location could also become more susceptible to rocket fire, additionally, if the Iranian proxies in the north also get involved.
Charlie, as we talk to you, we're looking at live pictures over Gaza and smoke rising. We've just seen what would be a couple of explosions now. More smoke rising from a different location. I mean, as we understand it, this major offensive hasn't yet started, but Israel still targeting areas, it would seem, where they believe there are Hamas militants gathered, or at least significant supplies gathered.
Yes, and we're still waiting for the latest updates from the IDF on strikes they conducted last night. Preliminary reports based on other sources that we've looked at this morning seem to suggest that it was just in the dozens, and it's common before invasions that there is a sudden dip in activity before the great surge. So that could be another indicator and warning of that imminent invasion that many have anticipated over the last week. But they are definitely still hitting targets, in particular air defence capabilities that Hamas has, and also anti-tank units. We know that 2 nights ago, when they conducted what they described as localised raids, the IDF said that they were targeting anti-tank teams in their raids on those border areas in the Gaza Strip. So clearly a preparing situation in order to allow heavy armour to move in for the first strike on the Gaza Strip.
OK, Charlie, we'll leave it there, looking at those desperate pictures there, live from Gaza, of just a relentless bombing campaign, or rockets, I'm not quite sure, but we're just seeing every so often some sort of deadly-looking explosion.
And as we await, as Charlie was saying, await this operation, land, sea and air, Benjamin Netanyahu says. And quite what that is going to be like, we do not know. People still fleeing where they can, but there have been reports and briefings claiming, and it wouldn't come as a huge surprise, it has to be said, that a lot of Gazans who are trying to flee south are being blocked by Hamas militants who don't want them to go because they provide a human shield.